Okay. All right. We back. We're back. We had some technical difficulties, but we are back. So Big Bro was talking to us about school and talking about what it helped him with. And but now I want to segue to talk to us about your when you first got called to your first church. How was it as a candidate for one? But how did you get called to your first church?
I didn't get called to my first church. Well. Yes, I did. Uh, my when I finished DBU, I went to my dad because I didn't, I felt like it was time for me to get out on my own. I had been preaching at that time now almost 20 years, uh, and 17 to be exact. And so I asked him for. I just finished DBU, so I asked him for a letter of recommendation. Well, he goes before the church and says, "Listen, we've invested a lot in McKinley, and I want a motion that we make him the pastor."
Oh wow.
And the chairman of the deacon board at that time, Deacon Rufus Taylor, hit the floor, and so I was voted in.
Uh-huh.
However, I was not allowed to do much pastoring.
Okay.
And so, but it taught me those first 4 years because there's several things was going on, uh, and all of us would have to deal with this. My dad was in twilight years of his ministry. He had been such a strong, powerful, impactful uh, pastor and preacher, and but he was starting to get older.
Hmm.
My dad was actually old enough to be my grandfather.
Right.
So by the time I was coming into my 20s, he was, he was in his 60s.
Right.
So he's starting to kind of, come down some. And uh, he put me in as pastor, but was not ready to turn the reins loose because he had been so accustomed
Right.
uh, to leading. And so there was a kind of a power struggle there, but I had better sense than not to fight the old man. I wasn't going to do that. Because those old preachers, and that's a word for some young preachers. It's gonna be mighty hard to fight an old pastor and live.
Mm.
You know,
My. Say
it's
that again. Say
it's
that
it's,
again.
it's yeah, you don't fight a senior pastor because in fact you'd have to get up mighty early in the morning. Uh, they got too much wisdom, got too much knowledge, and then nobody's gonna give you credit for fighting a senior pastor. And so I had better sense than to do that.
Right.
But it taught me how to deal with, because there's a lesson in everything. And if, even in the bad or the unpleasant or the things that, uh, things in ministry that you don't care much about, you can still learn and benefit from it if you just pay attention. So that taught me how to deal with conflict.
Yes, sir.
It taught me how to remain focused and do the things that I need to do, which the things that I went through with my dad, because he was in denial about getting older, and so and not being as effective as he had been in the past. Here I come along, young, vibrant
Right.
preacher, and so it was somewhat of a conflict. And anybody who's ever served, who's ever had their biological father as their pastor, or who has ever served with their biological father, that's not the easiest thing to do. Uh, and in some ways, he wanted to, control, uh, because he still saw me as his child,
Hmm.
and not as a young, mature pastor who now has a college degree, uh, and who has something to bring to the table that can reach a younger generation. And so I pastored there for 4.5, and prayed to the Lord, and The Lord moved us on to Starlight. Now, I had to candidate for that church. I was called to Samaria, and I was called to Starlight, but Starlight was the first church I had to candidate for.
Okay.
And I want to share this with other pastors, especially young pastors. Uh, I was advised by some other pastors uh, who I both trusted and had an influence on me not to apply for that church
Mm.
because that church had been split. Uh, um, the church that Deborah Mack pastors in Beaumont uh, came out of Cathedral of Faith,
Mm-hmm.
split out of Starlight.
Okay.
And then my predecessor had gone through uh, a series, a season of difficulty there.
Okay.
Uh, but he prevailed. They tried to put him out, and so some of the guys were like, you don't need to go there. That's a hell raising church. Da 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 da. Now, had I listened to them,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have gone. But that turned out for me to be one of the best churches I've ever pastored. Some of the sweetest people. It was a great ride. I mean, I had not one day of trouble. Those folk took me in, loved on me, uh, uh, and treated me like I was family.
Yes, sir.
And to this day, I still have a relationship with a large majority of that membership. That we still, and that's been, I went there in '02, so that's been, almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
And so so I want to advise young pastors. I know sometimes, and I know I don't want to sound like an oxymoron or a paradoxical statement. Yes, we need to listen to the advice of senior pastors and stuff like that, but then you have to also listen to the voice of God, because sometimes somebody would tell you not to apply for a church as a young pastor because, number one, they want it, or they have somebody in mind that they want. If you feel led
Yes, sir.
to apply for a church, apply for it. Don't let nobody talk you out of that, because like I said again, I had several pastors that talked against Starlight, and that church under my leadership saw growth that it had not seen since the late Dr. William Nelson McCarty.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we had one of the fastest growing churches in Beaumont,
Yes, sir.
and that happened under my leadership. You know, and so that process, I and the Lord, placed us there. Uh,
Right.
yeah,
And let me just say, because like I said, me and Big Bro, Pastor Jackson, we talk literally every week. Like we talk
yeah,
all the time. And so that's one thing when I was a candidate, he instilled in me, even when I was applying to different churches, Big Bro always told me, don't listen to God and don't listen
mm-hmm,
to the outside, because as you talk, as he just said, we've had this conversation about Starlight. It's like you could talk yourself out of a
mm-hmm.
great situation. So then let me ask this question then, Big Bro. Is it important? I know that we have friends in ministry, we have our people in ministry, but sometimes let me ask this question. Can we mess up? Can we mess up by talking to
Say it again.
I
Uh
said,
huh.
can we mess ourselves up from the standpoint because we go to too many people about a church instead of sometimes just letting the Lord do it? Can we mess ourselves up?
Your best bet is, especially, and I don't mean no harm, but I've been preaching 40 years. Uh, it's in your best interest to keep that between you and the Lord, and maybe
Right.
somebody that you really, really trust, a senior pastor that you know that won't hurt you, but telling your friends and da 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 da. In fact, my dad was up for, and both of these pastors are dead now. My dad and My dad was up for a church.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, at the time, it was one of the largest churches right here in the city of Fort Worth. This
Mm.
was many years ago, uh, probably late '60s, early '70s. Uh, he was up for Rising Star, and they was getting ready to call him.
Wow.
He had been preaching there. They liked him. He was preaching for the late Dr. Smith Curry,
Wow.
and how he got in there because he sat down there. And these are some of the things, the advantages of having a pastor that's your father, both in ministry and biologically. There were people in his church or in Rising Star that was from Quitman, Texas. My dad at that time was pastor of a church down there called Muddy Creek.
Okay.
And so there was a mother in the church, I forgot her name, but she had children that moved to Fort Worth. And so uh, Rising Star and Muddy Creek started fellowshipping because, of members in both churches. And my dad made the mistake. It was the late Dr. T.H. Davis, who knew nothing about Rising Star, called my dad. My dad said, I didn't have no better sense than to tell him everything, who I knew, and da 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 da. And he said, the next thing I know, I was out and TH was in.
Mm.
Because he was able to take the information, call the moderator, who was pastoring Macedonia at the time, and he was able to uh, uh, get TH in there. Uh, but uh, 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 I don't hold that against him, uh, uh, because TH Davis turned around. Samaria became vacant. J.R. Evans passed away, and he called my dad and said, listen, there's a good church up here. I want to know would you be interested. And so it was because of TH, even though TH got to Rising Star, it was because of TH Davis, the reason that we are in Fort Worth now.
Wow. Wow. No, that's that. Wow. That I never knew until you just told me. I never knew the fullness of that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
so then, as you are at Starlight, because those who know you, we know your story of how you've had this where you're pastoring now. So talk to us about how you went from Starlight back home.
Yes. Well, Pastor, like I said, I had a great ride there at Starlight. I met and married my current wife, who is a medical doctor. She's a physician, has her own practice, and had started, had was building a great life there. Uh, my dad fell ill,
Mm-hmm.
got sick, and he was from that generation where uh, he did not have retirement. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to encourage these young pastors, start putting something back. The late L.B. George, who pastored here in Fort Worth at the Mount Zion Church, said, uh, "Put away your anniversary money.
Yes,
Stop
sir.
buying, gaiters and tailor-made suits and expensive cars. Put you something back, if especially if you don't have any type of retirement as of yet.
Right.
Uh, start putting it back." And uh, uh, and uh, and so my dad felt ill. He didn't have retirement, so he could not retire. He fell ill. He had cancer, and so it forced him to have to preach beyond
Mm.
uh, what he was capable of doing in the past, trying to
Right.
hold on because now he can't stop,
Right.
And so I came home uh, uh, to help him.
Uh huh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I came home without taking a salary
Okay.
so that he could continue to get his salary.
Mm.
So I was living on love offering, and he was, and he still got his anniversary.
Right.
So, and I had an anniversary. My anniversary was in October. His anniversary was always the second Sunday in March. And so, but the church grew. The Lord blessed, you know, even though, and you talking about stepping out on faith. The church already, my dad is already straight. He already don't have retirement. So how are they going to take care of two pastors?
Right.
Well, that's when you have to learn to trust God for things that are beyond human comprehension.
Right.
My dad, the church grew. We were taking in at that time 250 members a year. The church grew. We took in over 1,000 members in
Wow.
those 7 to 8 years that I remained there as the pastor before I went to Memphis.
Hmm.
My dad died in 2013. I left in 14 and went to Memphis to pastor.
Wow. So when you're growing, so when the church is growing at Samaria, big bro, how did you still manage to keep that faith, knowing that you didn't necessarily have this salary?
Well, because the Lord proved to be faithful,
Right.
I was able to take care of my family. I was, able to pay my bills,
Right.
and for that I was grateful. And to see people walking the aisles, we were, baptizing every first Sunday, and just watching the church grow.
Right. So what would you tell a pastor who may see other pastors who have good budgets, but a pastor's being faithful, but the budget is not that great. It's the church can't really afford to do what they want to, or what even the pastor wants to do. So what would you tell a pastor to do in those situations?
Use what you got.
Hmm.
All Moses had was a stick and a stutter.
Right.
But on his ministry, he was able to part Red Seas
Right.
because he followed God. If you stay with God and use what you got, God will take your little bit,
Right.
and a little bit will become much
Right.
when you place it in the master's hand.
Yes, sir. So then, well, I appreciate that. So then, talk to us about your transition to Greater Middle in Memphis, Tennessee.
Well, I grew up in Samaria, and I wanted a fresh start, and I felt at the time that perhaps since my father passed, that my assignment was up there,
Yes,
and
sir.
I just I wanted to move on and try to accomplish some other things in ministry.
Right.
Um, so the Lord allowed us to go to Memphis to historical church, oldest African American church in the city. And one of the oldest churches, African American churches there is, because this church was birthed in slavery.
Right.
Church is almost 200 years old, uh, uh, and the first few pastors were white,
Mm.
because with the church being formed in slavery,
Right.
no more than 10 blacks could meet at one time without someone white being present. So they could not gather for worship without someone white. So their first several pastors were white. Um, then I had the distinct pleasure of falling in line and in that lineage uh, that followed the late Dr. Benjamin Hooks,
Right.
who was the former national NAACP president, who was the first uh, African American to be appointed, to the bench. He was a civil rights lawyer by trade. And so, and he pastored that church for well over 50 years. And so I was able to fall in that lineage and pastor there. It was a great church, great ride, great experience there in the city of
So
Memphis.
when you, so I so then let me ask you this question, and I know we've talked about it, but somebody may be watching. How do you pastor a historical church but maintain your own personality and not try to take on the personality of your predecessor?
Well, that's a good question. Number one, preachers need to know it's impossible to be somebody that you're not.
Right.
God has uniquely designed all of us to be different and unique. You have to learn to be comfortable with who God has called you to be. And it was mind blowing to the city of Memphis because uh, of my style of preaching. Dr. Hooks, our styles were totally opposite. You know, and his preaching kind of hinged on social justice.
Right.
Uh, you know, and I'm an expository preacher.
Right.
He was more. He lectured more. I raised my voice more.
Right.
So I didn't try to go in there trying to be Benjamin Hooks because that's just not me. And my thing over is this: they called me on the strength of who I was,
Yes, sir.
my style of preaching. Dr. Hooks didn't sing, I sing. Dr. Hooks didn't play instruments, I play instruments. You know, and so by the time I was called to Greater Middle, I had been preaching a while. It wasn't my first rodeo. Had been pastoring a while, and I was definitely comfortable in being who God has called me to be.
Yes, sir. And so as you say that, so as you telling us that are listening, us that are coming behind your generation about being who we are. So before we get to you coming back home, let me ask you this question, and what do you see in my generation and even the generation that's coming behind me that is encouraging but that can also use more improving?
Well, let me start with the improving thing. Uh, well, I start with the encouraging. It's good. I'm starting to see more young preachers going to school. However, more young preachers need schooling.
Okay.
I'm hearing too many young preachers. They're too cliche-ish. Tell me what's in the text. Don't cliche me to death. I want to hear, you know, make that text talk, make that text come alive. And definitely schooling also helps to enhance your thinking, your application, your imagination. Schooling helps all that because it helps to discipline you. So, you know, but one of the things that I see lacking with preachers of your generation is mentorship.
Hmm.
Uh, some of these preachers, young preachers, are getting called to churches. There was a time that you couldn't get called to a church without either the state president or the moderator or some pastor of influence. And so somewhere we've disconnected that senior pastor and that young pastor is that, that disconnect is there. And I'm not going to just blame it all on the young preacher, but I will encourage every young preacher needs a mentor. Every Timothy needs a Paul. And so that's some of the lack that I see, because young pastors now are getting churches at younger ages as uh, pastors of my generation and before. Uh, so it was very rare that you find a pastor, especially in a major city, that would get called to a major church at 18 or you know 21, stuff like that. So you're kind of seeing, or even a major church in a smaller city. or mid-sized city, you know. And so, but that young preacher still needs a confidant, someone that he can talk to, someone that's trustworthy.
And so, what do you see that's encouraging?
Like I said before, I'm encouraged when I see young pastors like you who are in school, uh, who are like sponges. A young preacher that you can't tell nothing to will not have a successful ministry if he will not listen to a senior pastor.
Yes, sir.
Uh, uh, and a young pastor needs to be a sponge
Right.
and soak up all that he can. Uh, uh, because there are some things that he has or she has yet to experience in ministry.
Right.
And you need wisdom,
Yes, sir.
you know. And so that's encouraging to know that there are still some young preachers out there who are going to school, who are serious about ministry. And
Right.
as the old pastor used to say, to my generation, that they can move on knowing that the work is still left in good hands.
Yes, sir.
So that's encouraging to me. And that's
Yes,
why
sir.
anytime you call me or you come around or you ask me something or whatever the case may be, that's why I'm always eager to share with you, to talk with you, to share what little knowledge that I have. Because I want to see you successful. I want to see all of the young pastors be successful. You know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, how was it? I mean, we've had the conversation, but when you felt the Lord leading you back home once again, just how was that transition? And I'm segueing to because somebody may feel, some pastor preacher may feel like it's time to leave or it may be time for a new step. So talk about your transition and how would you and what would you encourage a preacher or pastor if they get to that place where they feel like it's time for a transition?
Well, I came home. I came back home kicking and screaming. It's not. This was not my idea. This is strictly God's. In my quiet time of meditation and prayer, I was asking God to enlarge my territory and enlarge my ministry. Uh, and, uh, I felt that, it was time for me to move.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where God eventually, because I applied for churches all across the country. And I want to encourage us other young pastors, as I even encourage you during your time of search. God knows where He wants you to be.
Right.
He knows. He knows. You may not know, but God knows. And there were some churches, I thought I might have ended up in D.C. I used to run revivals up there. I thought I might have ended up in Charlotte. I would sometimes preach in Charlotte 4 times a year. Uh, uh, that there were other. I thought I'd end up in Atlanta. There was, then there was a church I thought I might have ended up in St. Louis. But my prayer has always been, because I don't ever want to be confused. Uh, uh, my prayer when I'm searching for a church, when it's been impressed upon my heart that it's time to move, it's been my personal prayer to God. God, if that's not where you want me to be,
Right.
then I don't want to get all the way to the end of the process. Let me get knocked out in the first round, and man, I was getting knocked out so many times. Like, now, Lord, wait a minute now. Hold on. And he was like, no, now you say it. If that's not where I wanted to be, you know,
Right.
uh, and so and I'm reminded of what my good friend Dr. John Adolph of Beaumont says. I don't ever want to be anywhere where the Lord is not, or where the Lord did not assign me. So that's always stayed with me. I don't want to be pastor no church that the Lord didn't send me to.
Right.
And so and so uh, then the Lord says, "Go back home." I'm like, "Huh? Go back?"
Right.
I'm like, hold on, Lord. If I go back, this will be my third time being installed
Mm-hmm.
at this church,
Mm-hmm.
and my second time being called back from out of town.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Now I got an issue, God, because they have way less than what I left them with.
Mm-hmm.
I left them with a great membership and money in the bank. They ain't got no more money because
Mm-hmm.
the church has been split 3 times less than 4 years. They've been to court, don't have no membership, no money. And my prayer to you has been enlarge.
Right. Yes, sir.
I you know, I think, I know there's nothing wrong with your understanding, but this that so the Lord had to arrest me,
Right.
and I had to yield to Him. And it was Dr. Stan Hilliard of Houston, uh, who I was talking with. He said, "Doc, there's two things we have to take from this experience." He
Hmm.
says, "Number one, we're not in control of our own destinies.
Wow.
So where you might want to go may not be
Mm.
where the Lord wants you to be."
Wow. Yes,
Yeah, I
sir.
had a desire to pastor other churches, but that was not in God's divine will.
Yes, sir.
And then, secondly, my dad was the longest tenured pastor of Samaria, and he taught and trained me to pastor that church.
Right.
And so the second thing that Stan Hilliard, Dr. Hilliard said, he said to me, and secondly, you don't know what kind of deal your daddy cut with the Lord.
Mm.
Uh, and so
Wow.
it just it just seems that Samaria, and it's been proven now that that is just where the Lord has placed me, and perhaps whatever the Lord might, my dad might have asked of the Lord to intervene, or whatever the case may be, I'm back there, and I
Yes,
got
sir.
it now. I'm not making no more moves. They'll roll me out of there, or I will retire there.
Yes, sir.
And you have to know where the Lord has placed you.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
you know, and learn. And so I had to come home with less than I've ever had, and with as less. I've never had as less to work with in any church I've pastored, including that church. The first 2 times, as I had this last time. You talking about stepping out completely on faith. That's what I had to do.
Yes, sir. Well, I got a couple more questions, big bro, and I promise I'm gonna leave you alone for now.
Okay,
Just
all
for now.
right.
Just for now. But as you talk about stepping out on faith, like I say, with new pastors like myself and others who, like I said, who may not have what somebody else has, but your story is an encouragement because you say, you have to step out on faith and then you see what the Lord will do. So, how do you keep yourself encouraged?
By remembering, number one, again, as Dr. Stan Hilliard told me, we're not in control of our own destinies.
Right.
If God placed me back at Samaria, it's His job and responsibility to take care of me.
Right.
And I know that do, if I put my best foot forward and uh, try everything that I can through prayer to grow that ministry, that God will give increase. I
Yes,
don't
sir.
think that God sends us anywhere. Sometimes God, I had Doctor, I can't call his name, but he pastors in Memphis, Delano. He
Hmm.
said sometimes God will send you to a church, but sometimes we become bullheaded, we become arrogant, we get beside ourselves. Then he says, then there are other times God will sentence you
Wow.
to a church.
Ooh.
And then sometimes God sentences us to a church for training, to get us ready for what He for the next phase of our ministry. So if God has sent us you to a church, if it seems like you can't get nothing off the ground, if it seems like I've heard John Thurston say, go ahead on and lay out the things that you're going. And if you know that you're at a church that you don't feel like you're going to stay, go ahead. Don't stop progressing. Still put together a plan. Still put together some things to move the church so you'll already have some stuff on paper and already be prepared for your next assignment. But don't just sit there and do nothing and become frustrated and allow yourself not to be able to use your to be used to your fullest potential. Continue to pastor there as if this is where you're going to be. And it goes back to saying what FD Sampson and all those guys told me: be faithful,
Yeah.
and God will reward your faithfulness.
Yes, sir. Well, like I said, big bro, I appreciate, as we always tell you all the time, all your advice and encouragement. Like I said, I want to thank you because like I said, this was at the spur of the moment, but but big bro always graciously consents to stuff. So I
Right.
appreciate him consenting to. So is there anything else that you want to say? Anything else you want to, like, any words of wisdom, any nuggets, anything like that before we close?
Well, I just will again want to encourage the young pastors. Stay with the Lord. Don't get caught up in the material things that we forget to reach the souls of the people.
Yes, sir.
Uh, we're living in a day and a time where um, people need to hear a word from the Lord. Make sure you study. Make sure you absorb everything you can from the text.
Yes, sir.
Uh, Make sure that what you're doing uh, helps to reach that community in which you're serving in.
Right.
Because the greatest impact of your ministry will come from the community that you're serving. And so get to know the people in your community, get to know the needs in your community, help meet the needs in your community. And that way you'll be helping people in your community. And so I just wanted to just share that.
Well, like I said, I appreciate it. And also, one more question: when we talk about pastoring and we talking about, community activism, and with the pandemic going on, how have you been able to still pastor in the pandemic, and what have you done to try to still be a blessing to the community in the midst of this pandemic?
Well, we've never stopped. For me, it's
Right.
like second nature because my dad was a strong community leader. And he taught me at an early age. We have a church, a sister church that we partner with uh, Bishop Ron Mays uh, for 30 years or so. He's been doing a big giveaway,
Right.
that I've seen him fill up the Cowboy Stadium, the football field full of toys and coats and things of that nature. So we've been able to work with them for the last few years. In addition to that, we did one this past Sunday at our church. We gave away over, oh shucks, some 300 toys and
Yeah.
bicycles and etc. And then came back this past Tuesday and partnered with our adopted school. and we met the needs specifically of 7 families where these kids didn't get anything for whatever reason. They were left out, you know, of the whatever you call it, that wish tree, or what is it called?
Oh, that angel tree.
Yeah, angel tree,
Angel tree.
and etc. And the other, entities and organizations that were given. There were 7 families that were left out, and we were able to meet their needs. And so there were parents that came to our church Sunday that told some of our members uh, that our kids wouldn't have gotten anything
Wow.
had we not came today, or had not this church provided the free toys and etc. And the same with those families this past Tuesday. Uh, Also, in my area, it's the highest concentrated area of people with felonies
Hmm.
getting out of jail, returning to the community. So we started a transitional center for women. Women going to jail has gone up 100% since the 70s. In fact, now there are more black women going to jail than there are black men.
Mm.
And so we've created a transitional center and here in Texas, I'm not sure about any other state, but you cannot get out of jail. Even if if you finish serving your sentence, you cannot get out of jail without a, a residence, an address, somewhere to go. And so we provide living quarters for women who are just getting out of jail. We have all types of counseling and treatments for them. We help them to get jobs, help them to get acclimated back into society, help them get Social Security cards, driver license, whatever they need, and we provide mentorships for them as well. So, I'm helping to meet the needs of my current community, and the only
Yes, sir.
way, and when I was writing my dissertation, we had to do a demographical study.
Right.
Every pastor needs to do a demographical study of his local area,
Yes, sir.
and see what's going on in that area.
Absolutely. And so when you talk about demographical stuff, just some of the things you're doing. You talking about what you get to do, like whether it's school, feeding, as you're talking about with prison sentencing, registering people to vote,
Exactly.
job
Hmm.
fairs, all of
Hmm.
these things.
Hmm.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because every area it would be slightly different.
Hmm.
For instance, my church sits on the border of our zip code.
Right.
Well, within a 2 mile radius, since we're on the border of our zip code 76105, I border 3 other zip codes within a 2 mile radius.
Right.
And doing my demographical study, I was able to see what each zip code, each community, some of the areas around my church are below poverty. There are some areas that are still middle class. There are some areas where it's more heavily Hispanic, and there are some areas where it's still, mostly blacks. So if I wanted to do some type of outreach, especially if I'm trying, since we are mostly a 90% African American church, well, I know where to reach African Americans now because I've done my demographical study.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate that advice because I'm gonna use that. Uh,
Yes.
I'm gonna seek you out and use that with help with my church as well. But like I said, once again, big bro, I appreciate you so much for agreeing to do this. Even though you're wearing that Dallas Cowboys hat, I still love you. I love you so much. But like I said, big bro, I appreciate you so much for doing this. And I know from the comments, a lot of people were helped today by what you shared with us, your wisdom and your knowledge. So I really appreciate you.
Well, it was my pleasure, Marcus. my blessing, to be able to share. For so many years, I was the young preacher, and it's interesting to see that I'm getting older, and I'm at that stage now where I'm starting to see younger pastors coming behind me. Again, I started pastoring in my early 20s, early to mid 20s, and then I started preaching at 6. So I've been a young kid on the block for a mighty long time.
Right.
And I've lived long enough to see that trend is changing.
Right. Well, like I said, thank you again. Thank y'all for watching, and then